Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third episode of my Safebet show. And it gives me an utmost pleasure, and it is my privilege and honor to have Judge Cheryl Moss as my guest today. Welcome, Judge. Welcome, Cheryl. Great to have you on the show.
Hello, everyone.
As usual, let me kick this all off by introducing to those, I'm sure, unfortunate few who wouldn't have heard about Judge Moss. Judge Moss served on the bench for 20 years. In 2001, she was the first judge to implement problem gambling assessments in domestic relations cases, truly first of its kind. In November 2018, she became the first judge to preside over Nevada's first Gambling Treatment Diversion Court, and we will be talking a lot about this today. She also happens to be a member of quite a few bars in the United States, including Nevada, DC, and Maryland, and she has a truly long-standing experience in this sector. And as a lot of you would have known, she is also of recent ESPN fame, thanks to our friend David Purdom. Judge, welcome to the show once again, and let me kick it off by a question that does not necessarily have much to do with responsible gambling. We will get there later. We are both rather avid sporting fans, although we would very clearly disagree on our allegiance and loyalties. But how did you become a fan of sports? How did that happen?
Oh, I've become a fan of sports ever since I was a little kid. Played sports, loved playing sports, particularly, well, in America we call it soccer, but in Europe we call it football. And I played indoor soccer, outdoor soccer, and I also watched a lot of sports growing up in the East Coast. I was a baseball fan. I love the New York Yankees. It's still my favorite team. And then something happened along the way, Martin. I got married, and now I've become a big Pittsburgh fan. So by default, by marriage, I am now a big fan of all Pittsburgh teams.
I'm sure we could be wasting a lot of time discussing the Patriots-Steelers rivalry, but let's not go there. The question I would have for you in a similar vein is about what is actually, if I may put it that way, going through your head while watching any sport, because you happen to be a judge or a retired judge these days. So did you ever find yourself rather rooting for the Zebras as opposed to one of your teams, because you could say that they are judges in their own right?
Well, Martin, it must be the judge DNA in me, because sometimes I would enjoy watching sports on TV and rooting for both teams. And what is wonderful about sports is it's to give us entertainment and to entertain the fans. And there was one time, there was a World Cup I was watching, and maybe it was 1996, maybe. It was Spain and Netherlands, and I rooted for both teams. So every World Cup, I actually do pick a team that I like to support. But that year, I picked both countries, and guess who ended up in the finals of the World Cup? The two teams I picked, and so I was happy with either team that won it. And I think it was Netherlands that won that year. I could be wrong.
I believe it was Spain, because the Netherlands are one of the unfortunate teams to never have won the World Cup. But let's wish them the best.
You're the expert.
Let's wish them the best of luck going forward. And I remember that because actually, to my utter shame, in light of what you have just said, I cheered for Spain in that game, to utter dismay of quite a few Dutch lawyers I happen to have been working with at that time. Of course, we have already extensively touched upon the fact that you were a judge, and in my book, an extremely successful and innovative one. So perhaps, can you tell me what is it like being a judge? Myself, I'm a UK qualified solicitor, and unless I'm mistaken, because my qualification run will come to 7 years this summer. So in theory, I could become a judge, but then I would be slightly concerned that that may be rather counterproductive and put a shame to the profession. So in your experience, what it was like becoming and being a judge?
Well, in my own unique experience, I had just graduated law school in Washington, D.C. I had a lot of job offers, but my mother asked me to come out to Las Vegas and move out to be near her. And I gave up my entire legal career in Washington, D.C. to come to Las Vegas in 1995. So I've lived here about 26 years. And when I first came out here, I mean, I didn't know anybody, and I knew I needed to take another bar exam and get a license so I can, my goal was to have my own law practice and have a small law practice. And I did, and I was able to accomplish that. And then I ran it for 3 years until somebody asked me to run for election, to run for the seat. There was an open seat in district court, family division. And it was me and 4 guys. And I had a low budget, but I just started campaigning, and that's how I became a judge. It was, and being such a new lawyer as well. I mean, my first bar was in 1994, and then now it's 2000. So 6 years as a lawyer, 3 of those and only in Nevada, and running a successful law practice. And then I became elected so young, very young, and that's why after 20 years, I've retired at a very young age. So you asked me what it was like being a judge. It was a big transition. I always said being a judge is hard work, but a different kind of hard work than being an attorney. There's a lot more reading involved and a lot more change of the way of thinking and how to approach cases. And I think it was something I really enjoyed, and I liked, because I preferred resolving cases than advocating for one side or another. And so I really had a good knack for it. In my first year as a judge, I was kind of a deer in headlights. It was a very big learning curve, but I stayed confident, and I knew that I can get through these 20 years. It wasn't easy, I'll tell you that, Martin, just like doing the lawyering thing. And because of me and a few others following me, they actually changed the law to have people practice for 10 years before they can become a judge here in Nevada, at the very least, for a statewide position. But I'm proud to have accomplished all of that and been able to get through 20 years of, roller coaster, up and downs, and difficult cases, easy cases, heart-wrenching cases, emotional cases.
And the rest is clearly history. And as I've said, so on behalf of the audience, I would say that you can most definitely be proud of your excellent record on the bench. And I'm sure that they would have changed the rules only because nobody else could ever achieve the heights that you have achieved in your profession. And that actually is an excellent segue into my next question. Of course, you were up there on the bench, but if you were to step into the shoes of those, be it defendants, be it attorneys that were facing Judge Moss, what do you think that felt like? Because in all honesty, I reckon, and feel free to disagree, that a lot of people out there would get rather a distorted picture of idea of what court hearings are all about, having watched way too many, in particular, American TV series that center around this topic. But having experienced it myself, I would suggest that the real life is very different. But what do you reckon the people that were facing you, and you just alluded to more straightforward cases, difficult cases, heart-wrenching cases, how did they feel like?
Well, as you know, Martin, family court is very emotional, and most of the time when they came into the courtroom, they are sometimes feeling emotions of nervousness, anxiety, wondering what's going to happen next. And after 20 years, I've learned that the best way to resolve things for those people are to bring closure and to bring it about much quicker than have to keep waiting for the next court date and the next court date and then getting to trial. And so I think that's the one thing I learned in 20 years is be more efficient, make the best decisions that you can and try to bring closure. Sometimes, and with two sides, being a lawyer, Martin, that the one party may not be happy with the judge's decision, the other party might be happy with it. But either way, they know that a decision has occurred and, an issue would be closed out and things resolved.
I can't agree more. And I suppose, or I would suggest, the worst kind of cases in terms of decisions might be those where neither party is actually happy with the outcome. And I believe that speaks to your point about having a closure at the end, ideally for everybody involved, especially in a setting such as a family court. We will come on to it very, very shortly. Gambling Treatment Court. And the Gambling Treatment Courts are clearly a true passion of yours. Unfortunately, owing to the pandemic, we haven't yet had the pleasure to meet face to face, and I'm sure that with the pandemic petering out, we will be able to rectify that in a foreseeable future. But I've had a number of very kind and also productive discussions with you digitally, and I could already from those discussions fathom that passion, but also that grit and hard work that's gone into your Gambling Treatment Court. So I would absolutely love if you could tell me and the audience more about it and how it works, and for those hopefully uninitiated few who would have never heard about it, what it is.
Well, Martin, if you can spare me a few minutes, I will try to briefly summarize what Gambling Treatment Diversion Court is. And I'll refer to it as GTDC because it's shorter. I'm a family court judge. However, I take referrals from our criminal court judges to do the Gambling Treatment Diversion Court cases. And so when a person ends up before a criminal court judge after having committed a crime that was done in furtherance of a gambling addiction, and it can't be a crime against a child, a crime of violence, of that, things of that sort, then they would end up before the criminal court judge, who would be told, I suppose, by the defense attorney, my client has a gambling addiction and he committed this crime. Typically, it could be theft or fraud or embezzlement, and he did it because he had a gambling addiction. And we would like to elect to go to GTDC court. So the criminal judge would hold an eligibility hearing, is what we call it, to see if they're eligible. And because we don't want just people saying, oh, I have a gambling addiction, send me to Judge Moss's court, and they get a get out of jail free card. And that's not how it works. In the eligibility hearing, we would hear expert reports or hear expert testimony or submit reports from somebody who would do an assessment to see, yes, this person truly has a gambling disorder, and that likely that the crimes that he or she committed, was due to a gambling addiction. And the judge would hear all of that evidence, and then if they deem that it was committed because of a gambling addiction, and typically these people have never been arrested before in their whole life, and it's their first offense, but it's charged as a felony, which is a very serious crime. And if the judge deems they're eligible, the judge would sign a court order saying, I hereby transfer your case to Judge Moss's GTDC court. And then from there, they would have their first appearance with me, and we would take it from there. Now, once they appear into my courtroom, we have our introductions. I tell them what our program requirements are. They have to sign paperwork. It is a process. It's not just you just end up in my courtroom and then just start going to court. We have them sign a gambler's contract. They have to be transparent. We will have access to all of their financial records. We will have the authority to do location monitoring to make sure here in Las Vegas they don't go to the Strip or any gaming sites, obviously. And there's might be, then we could talk about those things about the locations. Why did you go to a local casino, or were you there? Why were you across the street? Were you just getting gas, or why did you stay there for 5 minutes versus 5 hours? We could tell those things. But financial monitoring, and we also do drug testing. They unless it's an approved medication, their usual prescriptions, they cannot take illegal substances. They have to be drug free, and so drug testing, even weekly, we start them out weekly, is a part of it. Even though they have no drug history, every person usually has to go through the drug testing if they've never even used drugs before. Drug monitoring, financial monitoring. They have to get stable, they have to get a job, and then usually more later on in the end, we start talking about the restitution. And with the restitution, understand that sometimes there is no restitution. Sometimes they gambled away all of their money or their family money, but sometimes there is a victim, and that could be a former employer, a business, even including, and I've had cases where the casinos were the victims because the person was a casino employee who had access to funds and money. And now, of course, they can't work in a casino anymore, but they have to pay back the restitution to their former employer. So we do that, and we have to ensure that those protocols will be in place. And people are now wondering, as I'm talking about the money and the restitution, what if they owe a very large amount? I mean, I've had cases where it's over $500,000. Some maybe just $1,000. Some could be $30,000, $40,000. But the law says, according to how I run my court, is they have to pay the restitution. Yes, they have to repay all of the restitution, but the program can only last up to no more than 36 months. And so we would have them either do civil confession judgments and have them agree voluntarily to continue paying once they graduate from the program and that they are in recovery. It is part of their recovery to continue to make those payments. But that is sort of an overbroad view of what we do. There's a lot more details behind that, but basically it's accountability to the court. It's basically monitoring, and they had to come see me every other Friday, every 2 weeks, and if they were doing much better, they don't have to come maybe once a month or once every other month. But every 2 weeks is generally how we would monitor them as to make sure that they are completing all of the court requirements, staying in perfect compliance, and not violating any of our program's rules.
I have to say, and thanks for that overview, that you were not only a brilliant judge, but you would have also been a fantastic attorney, because you have just preempted or managed to preempt all the questions that I would have had about the GTDC. Clearly a very commendable and very needed effort. Perhaps we may even go as far as calling it a conscience of the gambling industry. And I'm hearing that now you're in the throes of expanding the original Nevada one from the Silver State of Nevada to the Garden State of New Jersey.
I am indeed, and I've been talking to other states as well, Martin. I think what's the best to understand about why now in my retirement I am pursuing these projects is because why do states need gambling courts? And, how is that going to impact also on the gaming industry? Gambling courts not only save lives, but they do save money. They save a lot of money. Let's talk numbers here. In Nevada, it costs approximately on average $24,000 a year to incarcerate someone. And there is no gambling treatment available to a person with a gambling disorder in prison. And so they would just be doing their time, not paying back their restitution, and they'll have to deal with other things once they finish out their sentences. And let's compare that to New Jersey, which is a very densely populated state. There are approaching 3 million just in the city of Las Vegas here. The state of New Jersey is tiny compared to Nevada, but they have 8 million people in that state. And a lot of the concentration of gambling, as you know, is in Atlantic City, but you can go from the top end of New Jersey or the bottom end and make it to Atlantic City within a span of 3 hours, maybe by car. And so $61,000 a year is the number in New Jersey on average to house somebody in prison. And so if you put a gambler in there, committed a crime, and a felony can run maybe 4 to 10 years, maybe they'll get out in 2/3 of the time. I'm not good with math. That's why we became lawyers, Martin, but 2/3 of 4 years minimum, 2+ years, maybe they'll get out, but they've done, nothing has been accomplished. The victim hasn't gotten their restitution, and who had to pay to house that person, to pay for their meals and their clothing in prison. 61,000 a year times 2+ almost 3 years is a lot. That's 180,000 almost. That's a lot of money for the state of New Jersey. And if we can get them into treatment, then we can talk about the recidivism rate going lower. Hopefully they will get treatment for their gambling addiction. They won't go back to committing crimes, hopefully. And for those who are have this severe gambling disorder, that's why they end up in GTDC court. Abstinence is going to be the most important thing as part of their recovery. They won't be able to gamble. And you know, Martin, that nationwide, the rate is about, I believe, 5%. And it could be lower, but I know it's 6% in Nevada alone because we're the gaming capital. Maybe not so anymore after looking at New Jersey and Pennsylvania's numbers. But the percentage obviously might be small, but every life matters. Every life matters, and every life that we can save and we can help. It's the human aspect of it, Martin. I don't, maybe we don't see that working in the gaming industry, but there are people in the gaming industry who's probably had family members who are affected by a gambling addiction. I know of people, in higher up in the gaming industry that have had gambling addictions and are in recovery. Some do actually maybe still work in the industry that they work with, but it's how they do their recovery, and it's how they individually stay healthy with their recovery. But there are gamblers who are in prison that can't see their families. There are gamblers who, even if they didn't go to prison and the judge had given them probation, before we even had gambling courts, they go home at night and they cry because their kids aren't talking to them. Their mother and father are not talking to them. Their family just basically shut them out because it's very hard sometimes for them to forgive, what they did. But, and it's part of their recovery also to acknowledge, take responsibility, not blame anybody. But it also has to speak to the fact that it is a disease. They just don't go out, and just gamble $1 million in a matter of 7 months. I've seen cases like that. How could they do that? How could they possibly do that if they're only making, let's say, $50,000 a year? The addiction consumes the person. And if you start out with that understanding that it is a disease, then you will understand, the human aspects of it and how it can destroy families and destroy people. And I don't think the gaming industry obviously would obviously support that. I think that's why I'm very proud that the gaming industry is doing things to do programs just as what you've done, Martin, with responsible gaming, and make sure it's just a form of entertainment and not something that will affect somebody. Those few, not everybody. A lot of people will go in and enjoy it. There are a lot of people that can go into a casino and enjoy the gambling, but they do gamble responsibly. They know they set limits, but for some people they can't control it, and that's a very few percentage, but that percentage does matter, and that's why I pushed for the gambling courts, and I was very fortunate to be able to create the first one in Las Vegas. And after I retired last January 2021, it's still going strong, and they still have 9 participants. It's a small number, but every one counts.
Absolutely, in my view, this is absolutely amazing, and thanks for bringing up the human aspect of all our efforts, and the fact that there is, of course, a large majority of those that enjoy themselves reasonably and responsibly while gambling, but at the same time we do have, I would suggest, a collective responsibility to help those who are not that lucky. And I suppose every now and then we might fail to see the wood represented by the overall picture for the trees of the individual programs. And we of course talk about technology in this space a lot, and that's a great tool in itself. But indeed, just like you, I would lay a lot of emphasis on the fact that ultimately we are talking about human beings that in this case require a lot of help, which is yet another, going back to my previous point about your preempting my questions, great segue into my next one. It's, I believe, very difficult to define what responsible gambling actually is. But if you were to give me a few thoughts about what is the end game here, what are we all trying to achieve when we're being part of the Gambling Treatment Diversion Courts, when we are launching responsible gambling programs? What is, in your view, what is meant to be the end game here?
Yeah, there's 7 casinos in Pennsylvania. They're becoming like Las Vegas style casinos. The Borgata, I think, was the very first one, maybe. And with all that entertainment and all that, we're going to have to be wary. And it's the same message my mom said in the late 70s, early 80s. Legalization of casino gaming is coming to New Jersey, and there's going to be gambling addiction problems, and we need to take care of that. We're not against casinos, but we want to help those that are going to be afflicted with that disorder. And so I think we need to kind of close the gap between the treatment and funding, and be able to fund the treatment for those to do that, and to also to coexist and open up lines of communications between those that are very vocal about casinos are harmful, versus on the other end of the spectrum, obviously. And we need to find ways to bring that gap closer. And there is a gap, but they also have to find a tunnel to open the lines of communication. And I think with me being a judge who doesn't, I don't work for the gaming industry and I don't work for the treatment world, I think I would hopefully be able to, help dig that tunnel to create the lines of communication in terms of what can we do to help each other, and how can we continue. I am excited. I'm actually excited to see all these new casinos, popping up, and all the sports and the online betting. But we also have to be mindful and careful of how that kind of exposure can lead some to either develop a gambling addiction or gambling disorder, or find ways to better treat that, and also to kind of head it off. And so I love what you're doing in terms of the programs that you're doing in terms of prevention and education. I think is very key in terms of how we're going to make the public aware of that. And of course, the youth, you have to think about the youth and other vulnerable populations, the elderly, and ensure that with kids that they're exposed to gaming and gambling, that they learn about that education. They're seeing it a lot on TV commercials, but look at what happened with, they don't have cigarette commercials anymore, obviously, but with the gaming, obviously we want to make it fun and entertaining, but being a family court judge, I also want to send that message to all parents out there, and that's to ensure that the information that your children are exposed to, that they're taught, they're taught properly in terms of what it means. I mean, when I was growing up, you had to be 21. It's still 21 to, when I growing up in New Jersey, I'm from New Jersey, and going to a casino, and how they make sure they check your age. But I was always taught that, it's for adults, and then it's a form of entertainment. And, and, my parents were always very careful about that. And I know, I mean, let's be realistic. My dad gambled. He gambled for fun. And, does the gambling court judge gamble? I'm like, well, yeah, I think maybe when I go in for research purposes, I want to see how the latest machines work. It's just my usual, drop a little money in there and then see how the lights and the sounds work. And, but it's been a while. I haven't been to a casino in a while with COVID. It's been tough, Martin, but yeah, I've gone in casinos with my mom. We would go in there and say, "Oh, look at the new slot machine," or "Look at they changed their." Do you smell something different in the atmosphere? It smells like it makes you feel good or whatever. The aromatherapy that they have in there, and I like to study a lot of that stuff. But send the message that we need to be. If you're going to advertise, make sure it's advertised maybe responsibly, and not give people too much hope, or that this is going to be like a big jackpot, big win or anything. But just like I would think that it doesn't give that sense of too much overdone. And I like that. Still, we should continue to have the 1-800-GAMBLER, message at the bottom or at the end. I know that, your company does that. They have these messages on responsible gambling. And we need to continue to look more into that. So coexist, close the gap, build a tunnel, open up the lines of communication, and maybe we can continue to do that because you're in the UK, Martin, and you see what's kind of happening with all the review going on in the UK and how they're going to make things better. And I'm following that, and I love seeing what some of the programs that they're doing there. And I tend to agree with that. With the affordability checks, and now banking industry getting involved, and I think that's the main idea the main thing I'm hearing right now, and I think it's a very viable solution to do affordability checks. And with the technology that you were talking about, we can feed that in. And there's a lot of algorithm uses that the casinos are in the casino industry. I think we could turn some of the algorithm uses also to study responsible. I mean, the study the prevalence of disordered gambling or problem gambling, and turn those algorithms into how to identify them, and then obviously and not prolong anything in terms of if these people need to get help. So we need to get them out of a casino basically, and get them help, and they should exclude themselves, and exclusion programs also do work. I've seen studies on that. And they do have some bit of success. So that's my message.
Very, very wise words and a very spot on message indeed. And hopefully me saying that doesn't sound patronizing, and I'm in no position to be patronizing somebody like Judge Cheryl Moss. Indeed, a couple of new properties coming to the Strip in a foreseeable future. Last time I checked, the good old Caesars was still there, and they were very lucky to have had you all those years ago when you were taking the bar exam. To wrap it all up, if I may, my usual rather unfair question, in particular as regards the short span of time that I'm about to give you to give our audience your final key message if you were to, being a judge, of course, deliberate on today's podcast. If you have 60 seconds to give the audience the key message that you would really like them to take away, then please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Well, right now, my current passion is gambling treatment diversion courts. And so there is a legislative bill going on in New Jersey. So keep a lookout for that. I think there's a good chance we might get gambling courts in New Jersey, and we'll move on maybe to Pennsylvania and other states. My message to you is that gambling treatment diversion courts do work, and they do save lives, and they save taxpayer money. And so that's the simple message I have. Why have gambling courts? Because they save lives and they save families. And when you save a life, obviously it's a good feeling. That's all I do. It's part of my community service, my public service. And although I'm retired now, I feel that my mission right now is to train new judges, and if they're going to have gambling courts there. And so if it happens, I would be thrilled to do that and provide that part of education. And I think being a 20-year judge and being a retired person now, that's what we do when we retire. We pursue these projects and then pass on our knowledge. I have no regrets about the 20 years that I did as a family court judge. It was a lot of hard work, and so was Gambling Treatment Court. It was a lot of hard work to create it and run it for 2 years. And as I look back on it, I'm kind of proud of what I did, and I want to be able to share my knowledge and with the rest of the world. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. And we're very proud of you and very proud of your work, ladies and gentlemen. This is the way too humble and at the same time very impressive Judge Cheryl Moss. My name is Martin Lycka, and this was the 3rd episode of my Safebet show. See you next time.